I'm your pocket filler, the parlay killer, the Northside thriller. Start the broadcast. Subscribe with a smash. The Gorilla Sports Podcast.
Hey guys, welcome in Gorilla Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bullpen, and it's Saturday, November the 30th. Now that is how we do American Thanksgiving. We went 5-0 on Thursday, and we went 2-0 yesterday. We took Travis Kelce over his receiving prop. We took Brock Bowers over his receiving prop. We lost our same game parlay. We tried to add the Kansas City Chiefs team total over 23.5. Oh, come on, guys. That's painful. 4 field goals. That's all right. It's funny. I was actually trying to put the kicker for Kansas City in as one of the legs, but FanDuel won't let you add a kicker to a same game parlay, and DraftKings wouldn't post a number for the kicker. So that's why I went with that Kansas City team total just as a throw-in for the same game parlay, and it didn't come through. What are you going to do? We went 2-0 on our official plays, though, so we'll take that, guys. 7-0. We're having a nasty NFL November. We are 30-10. We're hitting 75% of our plays, guys. All one-unit plays. This is some good stuff. All right, let's get into our plays for Sunday, guys. Let's go. So my first play is I'm taking Cooper Kupp over 64.5 receiving yards. Now, he's covered this in 3 out of his last 4 games coming back from his injury, averaging 87.5 over that stretch. That is over 20 yards of value. Thank you. The one miss that he's had since coming back was last week versus a tough Eagles defense, but he still got 8 catches for 60 yards, so he was right there. And now they're going versus a New Orleans defense that is nowhere near the Eagles. They are the 5th lowest, they give it the 5th most receiving yards to the wide receiver position. And that was a season-long stat. That's not without Marshawn Lattimore. When they traded Marshawn Lattimore 4 weeks ago, this defense is falling apart. Wide receivers that play the same position as Cooper Kupp have destroyed out of the slot. Jerry Jeudy, 142 yards. Drake London, 97 yards. Ladd McConkey, 111 yards. This is a great spot. Give me Cooper Kupp over 64.5 receiving yards. My next play is in that same game. I like Derek Carr over 214.5 passing yards. He's covered this in all 3 games since coming back from injury. We've been on 2 of them, so we're going to ride it for a 3rd straight week. He's averaging 251 yards over his last 3 games. Perfect. That's about 35 yards of value. LA gives up the 8th most passing yards to the quarterback position. And this is a high total. It's 49.5. I think both teams are going to score. We know New Orleans defense isn't great, and we know the Rams defense isn't that great either. So I think both teams are going to score. I think now that he's got MVS and he can throw that long ball to Marquez Valdez-Scantling, he bombs it up. The last 2 games, Scantling's put up almost 200 yards, and a lot of that is coming from these Derek Carr bombs. So I love that. Give me Derek Carr over 214.5 passing yards. My next play is I'm taking Tony Pollard, running back, Tennessee Titans, over 65.5 rushing yards. Now, he's covered this in 5 out of his last 8 games. He's averaging 80 yards a game over his last 8 games. He just came off a 119-yard game and a touchdown versus a tough top 10 Houston defense. And now he's going versus a Washington defense that gives up the 2nd most rushing yards to the running back position. The last 6 running backs have all covered this line versus Washington. Rico Dowdle, 86. Saquon, 146. Even Jalen Warren got 66. Tracy, 66. Swifty, 129. That is a monster look. I know Spears is coming off his concussion, so he'll be limited even if he does play, but this will be Tony Pollard's backfield. Give me Tony Pollard over 65.5 rushing yards. My next play is I'm taking Ramondre Stevenson over 13.5 rushing attempts. Now, I found that on DraftKings at minus 130. That's the best price I could find. I see it's at 14.5 at FanDuel. I like that. I wouldn't go any higher than that, though. Now, he's got over this in 2 of his last 3 games and 3 of his last 5 games. His last game, he didn't cover. It was versus Miami, but Miami took a 31-0 lead to them. So obviously, you got game scripted out. You can't run yourself back into the game if you're down 31-0. But he's been an absolute monster. Over his last 5 games, he's averaging 15.6 rushing attempts, so that's perfect. The Colts give up the 5th most rushing yards to the running back position and the 2nd most rushing attempts. Now, the Colts are 2.5-point favorites, but any game that the Colts have won this year, they don't blow teams out. So I don't think we have to worry about Ramondre Stevenson getting game scripted out of this thing because the Colts have a bad defense. And they're not going to run up the score on anyone because the opposing team can always score on them as well. In the 5 games that they've won this year, the opposing running back has covered this prop on every single one of them. And if New England has the lead in this game near the end of the game, they're going to lean on Ramondre Stevenson to close it out. So this is a great spot. Give me Stevenson over 13.5 rushing attempts. My next play is I'm going to Trey McBride, tight end, Arizona Cardinals. We're going to take him over 58.5 receiving yards. I found that one on FanDuel. It's a better price. I think it's 60 or 61.5 on DraftKings, so I would look to FanDuel if you can. Now, he's covered this in 3 of his last 4 games. He's coming off a season-high 12 catches for 133 yards. Now, he's going versus a Vikings team that's actually middle of the pack versus the tight end. But let's be honest, Trey McBride isn't your everyday tight end. He lines up all over the field. He's more like the wide receiver. He leads the team in receptions, receiving yards, targets. He's their absolute focal point of this offense. Now, the Vikings allow the 5th most passing yards to the quarterback position and the most receiving yards to the wide receiver position, which kind of half of his plays he ends up playing in the wide receiver position anyway. The Vikings just let Cole Kmet go 7 for 64 versus them. You're telling me Trey McBride can't get 58.5? I like Trey McBride over 58.5 receiving yards. My next play is I'm taking Courtland Sutton. Now, this is a Monday night play. This is another one of those spots where I think the number is going to skyrocket by the time Monday hits. Now, I found that at DraftKings at 63.5. He's covered this in 5 straight games, averaging 95 yards a game. His season average is 62, and that's kind of what the sports books do. They just look at whatever their season average is, and whether it's a better matchup or a worse matchup, they'll just kind of tick on 1 or 2 yards. But this has been a different Courtland Sutton the last 5 games. He's been an absolute monster. Cleveland gives up the 5th most receiving yards to the wide receiver position. And Cleveland's also coming off like an emotional win. They just beat Pittsburgh in Cleveland in the Snowgate. It was a messy, emotional, divisional game, and now they got to travel on the road Monday night in elevation in Denver. So yeah, give me Courtland Sutton over 63.5 receiving yards. All right, I got one more play for you. It's not my favorite play, but I like Joe Mixon over 19.5 receiving yards. Now, he's covered this in 3 straight games. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 5 games. Jacksonville gives up the 3rd most receiving yards to the running back position. Last game, both Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery both covered this receiving yard prop versus Jacksonville. Everybody covers their receiving yard prop versus Jacksonville. The only worry I have in this game is that Houston takes a big lead versus them, and they don't need to dump anything off to Joe Mixon. But it only takes 1. He seems to break 1 a game, so I like this spot. Give me Joe Mixon over 19.5 receiving yards. All right, guys, we're on a nasty tear. Let's keep this thing going. If you're rocking with me, let's roll.